Hello everybody, welcome back to the Music Gauntlet channel. I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far, and now that we finally have gotten our best songs of 2020 out of the way, we can talk about the best albums of 2020. And I cannot wait to make this list. Like I mentioned in my best songs of 2020 video, there was a lot of great music and great albums to come out of the year despite it being so shitty. Whether that was a factor of artists planning to release an album in 2020 regardless, or just having to release an album due to the circumstances and having a lot of free time to themselves, very little of the album output would I categorize as mediocre or average, because more times than not, I found myself enjoying the output as opposed to being disappointed by it. But we can stop that whole artist releasing double albums in the same year. That can end. That can be a trend that dies off in 2021, please. Even though with streaming, that doesn't seem likely. In any case, I somehow managed to round up 20 of my favorite albums that dropped this past year and rank them in numerical order. No shit, that's how lists work, right? And just like my best songs of 2020 video, the 8 albums that aren't ranked in the top 12 are going to be listed as my honorable mentions. All of these albums I have love for and helped me get through a truly nightmarish year, but let's waste no more time and get into this list. Starting out with Now let's kick off this list proper, starting with number 12. Yep, we're starting on a sad note. I know I've said this before, but I really didn't want this record to be as good as it is for the sole purpose of reliving through the pain of losing somebody so credible as an artist, but lo and behold, this ends up being one of his best albums in his discography. It's funny because this is the furthest thing from a hip-hop record, not really the furthest thing, but it stretches beyond that genre a lot, and that's the genre that he inhabited when he first came into the game. It's almost extremely difficult to categorize this album into one genre because, of course, it has hip-hop on it, there's some funk elements, pop elements, R&B elements, there's even a little soft rock in there. A lot of how gorgeous and elegant and fine-tuned this record sounds has to be credited to John Bryan, though, who took the project on after Mac passed away.
He's like, this is great, I love this. I'm like, I'm really into it too. And he started singing over it in the control room, and he sang the chorus of Good News.
There is a bit of a somber and monotone mood carried throughout the whole project, but there's some intricacies with the production and intricacies with Mac's lyrics that really draw you in as a listener. And some of these lyrics can be just downright shocking, the way that Mac Miller is speaking as if he knew what his tragic downfall was going to be and how his life was going to end. It's saddening, but also mind-boggling. It's what makes songs like Good News and Hand-Me-Downs hit so hard. And I think the only reason I have it in 12th place is because it was a hard album to come back to all the time. I had to be in a certain mood to want to hear it. Going back to this album in full was a challenge, so oftentimes I found myself listening to just songs like Blue World and Complicated, which weren't as depressing, but a challenge in the best way possible, because when I was in the mood to hear this album from start to finish, it was just a total immersion into Mac Miller's mindset in his final, just last leg of his life. Rest in peace to Mac Miller. Thank you again, John Bryan, for helping this project see the light of day, and I think it's about time we moved on to number 11. Royce da 5'9", what a career this man has had. I swear this man has only gotten better with time, and I honestly mean that. The 22-song, hour and 8-minute runtime was probably a pretty big deterrent for some people, but by the end of it, Royce rewards you for sitting through this length of an album by offering you new knowledge and a new perspective. The whole beginning part of Royce's career centered around him proving that he was a dope lyricist that could kill the mic. But since he's done that for so long, he's learned to evolve into a lyricist that cares more about social subjects and talking about his personal story than doing stuff that pertains to battle rapping. In other words, just wasting your time talking about things that don't really matter. But don't worry, he's still coming through with those slick bars like Royce does. One that stuck with me ever since I first heard the album was the line where he says, "You couldn't make a classic out of that trash if you had bread to drop it." But now those are just sprinkled across an album where the main focus is making social commentary. The main focus of this album is showing how black people are suppressed in America and how certain things in American culture are hidden meanings for other things, more slanderous racist things, which is made apparent by whether you know the origin of the ice cream truck song or not. It's still put on this album to remind you and shed light on it. He really just pulled out all the stops on this project. He pulled off some great guest features, which I know is just from the hunger of the Griselda crew and others. He produced nearly this entire album by himself, which I gotta say is incredible for how it sounds. He does a great job of painting his soundscape when he's talking about individual topics. And spending so many years in the game, you would think Royce at this point may sound like a jaded artist, but yet he's spitting at his most potent and most realistic I think I've ever heard. The only track I don't really care for is Tricked, which is not just only because of the chorus, you know, there are some other misinformation bars in there, but for the most part, I thought this was a really well thought out and cohesive album. Royce proves to be getting better with time, and I'm just looking forward to see what his next release entails. And with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to number 10. It might not be the highest ranking on this list, but this project defined my 2020. And yes, I am counting these projects as one album because together they are less than an hour in runtime and they work perfectly together like yin and yang. It's easy to say that this album is so good because one part of the album is all about good stuff and the next part of the album is all about bad stuff. But it's a little bit more complex as both the good and the evil have a little bit of each inside them. You can see this from the album artwork as Everything is Beautiful shows her putting on a fake smile while also bleeding from her nose, while Everything Sucks still shows her having a teddy bear in her arm while also wearing a pink bunny hat. And the songs follow suit as she's trying to enjoy herself, but she can't help but have these negative thoughts in the back of her head. And when she's trying to be a harder personnel, she can't help but resort to her more childish tendencies. But both on selective moments on these projects, when she chooses to really lock in and make a really happy song or a really depressing song, it plays out extremely well. The track Sugar Honeyed Iced Tea is still one of my favorites, even though I know it came out before 2020 as a single, but it just has so much bounce and energy. I love the call and response chorus she has with the choir. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who listens to that song with the trumpet and all and not feel slightly better after hearing it. But then you can jump to a track like Just a Kid where, wow, she gets so personal that it's almost hard to listen to. Retelling of everything that she's been through, it's pretty heartbreaking. She flexes her smooth cadence and punchlines in the beginning part of this project. She gets into some really hard bangers on the second part of this project. And it was just the project I needed in 2020, one that was just as hectic as the world that we were living in. And let's be honest, still kinda are. Great bodies of work. I would strongly recommend listening to Everything is Beautiful and then Everything Sucks. And I think that's it. Let's move on to number 9. The album that dropped on this list, the latest out of the bunch, that being in November, A$AP Rock, man, he just doesn't miss. He's had projects that are weaker than others, but anytime I think a project, for example, this project, it was I think it was 3rd in ranking from my favorite albums of his, but even then, it still finds its place at number 9 on my best albums of 2020, so what does that tell you? Coming off of The Impossible Kid, which was one of his more shorter records to date, and then going on to make 21 songs in an hour and 3 minutes, even I was skeptical about it. And my first couple of listens, I was like, yeah, this is good, but it's definitely a little too bloated. It only connected more for me when I read more into the lyrics and I saw how each song was incorporating this idea of a spirit world into them. He does this so you as a listener have some kind of vehicle to allow you to deal with your more depressive times. However, in the process, you start to realize that he's also losing his sanity and visiting this place so many times. He can play this up for laughs, like when he talks about being drunk and building his own spaceship, or his trip to Peru in which he whispered stuff to dolphins. But then you have tracks like Sleeper Car and Kodo Kushi, which suggests that he's addicted to the spirit world and the idea of life in death so much that he might just end up dead. In the end, it is just a cautionary tale, but A$AP Rock is describing it way too much as if he knows it on a personal level. He gives so much intense detail that you can't help but believe him. There's just so much that happens on this record, and like A$AP Rock said in his Flood magazine interview, it's meant to be listened to whenever you like. You can flip around and listen to any song that you want to, like you would flip around and look at pages in a field guide. But at the same time, A$AP Rock does present a character arc if you listen to this project from start to finish. It's as if he went through everything that he went through on this project and then wrote the opening skit for it. Again, this is an impressive display in which A$AP Rock made all the beats for this album, which is pretty impressive considering how nightmarish they get towards the back end. And it's very interesting him knowing the soundscape that he's going for, and he can craft this whole entire world around what he's talking about because he knows what he's trying to convey. The rhyme schemes, the flow, the punchlines, they're all there. At the very least, going into a project, you know A$AP Rock is going to rap his ass off. As mentioned, just came out in November, but I've been bumping it ever since it did release. But I think it's about time we moved on. Next, number 8. Ah yes, another album that was my anchor in 2020. The supergroup composed of EarthGang, JID, Hollywood JB, Jordan Bryant, Mariba, Black, and Benji was also an act I was not anticipating hearing from in 2020. It seemed like everybody had their hunch that they were gonna get back together at some point, but the way they did it and so soon, it was like, oh, they're doing it, okay. Let's do it. A wonderful gumbo comprised of R&B, hip-hop, soul, each artist bringing some kind of strong skill set to the table where they all came in unison for just an outstanding project. There are slick beats, they do a lot of bass and guitar-driven grooves, but even then they build the atmosphere around that so well. And the harmonies on this thing are so pleasant. You have extremely lush production, you have extremely sharp lyricists. What more could you want? Of course, that's not all. They set this album in a loosely tied concept of an apocalyptic world, which is supposed to mirror 2020, and they center the beliefs of Spilligion around the idea of taking this darkness, taking the murk in your life and using it to your advantage and allowing it to motivate you. So yeah, you can tell why that was nice to hear last year. Johnny Venus's verse on the song Family still gets me every time. He's talking that real shit. Dr. Dot on Baptized is a strong highlight, and JID at this point has the Midas touch. I'm not sure there's any track he can hop on that isn't going to sound good. If you want a precursor as to what you're about to hear on the project, then listen to End of Days first, and you'll get an idea as to the flow of each and every artist. And if you're a fan of these artists and haven't heard of Spillage Village yet, you need to get on that ASAP. Now I think it's a good time to move on to number 7. Thank God, baby, thank God. With as mixed a projects as Humans and the Now Now were, I was a little curious as to what direction David Albarn was going to be pushing this band in. I didn't lose faith in Gorillaz per se, but I was a little weary as to where they would be headed. But if the formula for making an album as good as this is to work with each artist separately and take your time with each and every song with care, then by all means keep doing it. This album is awesome. The amount of soundscapes Albarn is able to cover while working with so many diverse artists, it's just incredible. The problem with Humans was it sounded like they wanted to work with these artists but didn't know how to make it fit into a cohesive project. Here, it's done in the best way possible, which is making you feel like you're in one season of a show jumping from idea to idea. Whether I'm being entranced by a softer piano ballad fusing the likes of Elton John and Black, or being able to rock out and let loose a little bit with Slow Tie and Slaves on Momentary Bliss, the execution of the project feels so well thought out and cared for. Again, we have another parallel to 2020 with the title of the album and the opening track Strange Times. The inclusion of these twinkling keys over Robert Smith's vocals, it really sounds like a maddening state of mind. It doesn't play a huge role on this album being the first track, but it just spins you around a bunch of circles and then shoves you straight into this album so you're a little dazed and confused. Things are happening around you, you don't know why they're happening, but you're having a good time. Stellar performances from Albarn and all the guests that he brings into his world. I have way too many favorites just to list them all, and overall I am impressed with the direction that the Gorillaz headed in. I wasn't sure what I was going to get in a future Gorillaz release, but this surpassed all the expectations in my head. Hopefully there's a Song Machine 2, we'll just have to wait and see, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and move on to number 6. Yeah, this placement surprised me too. But as far as pop records go this year, this was it for me. This album was just tip of the iceberg, which in part has to do with Sawayama being able to embody so many lanes and genres of music. You have modern pop music, you have dance pop music, you have nu metal, you have ethereal rock, you have electronic, you've got R&B. It's full throttle from the opening track Dynasty and on, hearing Sawayama having to cover this much ground in ethereal atmosphere. But she does it not only flawlessly, but with such conviction. It's crazy comparing the rash hard metal sounds of this opening track to the very low-key, almost dream pop-like atmosphere of the track Bad Friend. It's so admirable seeing an artist push their genre of choice in so many different directions and to make it so experimental. It proves that you care enough about the music you're making to propel the genre as a whole forward, and I think that's exactly what Sawayama accomplishes here. The production's on point, the vocals are on point, but then you also get the bonus of having the content to be about her adulthood and her childhood. The whole album has this driving theme of finding one's own identity. There are moments when I'm listening to this album and I just have to stop dead in my tracks and appreciate what is happening in my eardrums because it is just that masterful. And I think that's when this album is at its best as well, when you're not picking apart individual songs and you listen to it from start to finish, kind of why there weren't any of these songs in my best songs of 2020. You start to build a profile of Sawayama as you're listening to all these experiences that she's been through and the things that have shaped her into the person she is today. Everything works so well together, the songwriting, the production, the vocals, everything is just a beautiful blend, and I'm surprised again that she meshed these many genres and made it sound this good. This is the first project I've ever heard from Sawayama, so you can bet your ass I'm looking out for what she's going to release in the future. But until then, I'm glad we've got this great body of work to hold on to. Now let's go ahead and move on to number 5. Coming fresh off of Supermarket and Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, it's safe to say that everybody was like, yeah, the odds of this album being good? Slim to none. But there was one light of hope still remaining, that being that this was allegedly going to be Logic's last album before he retired. And Logic took that hope and ran with it. A little story time, I was listening to this album the night it came out with some friends around a campfire, and I could not pay attention to the conversation we were having because this album just kept pulling me back in. I was just kind of like, yeah, that's cool, that's cool. And I just turned my head back to the speaker. Well, I guess you're wondering, what did Logic do that was so incredible that made you put him in your number 5 slot? And to answer that question, he f***ing rapped. He did what all of his fans, including myself, have been wanting him to do for years now. Just f***ing rap. Don't try and create these bigger than life albums that you can't execute. Don't try to be a different artist. Just do you and do you the best you can. Producing tracks for the underground like Harriet. How have I not heard that bar yet already? How has nobody else thought of that? The project is smooth as hell, no ID comes through with some great executive producing, and shout out to Six for like making Logic the best beats no matter what phase of his career he was in. I thought for sure Dad Bod was gonna be the cringiest song on here, but somehow it ended up being one of my favorites. It reminded me a lot with that backing string section of Forbidden Fruit by J. Cole. His tangent flow on Growing Pains 4 when he interpolates Outkast's Elevators, like, dude, come on. That Biggie kick in the door punchline, that was a good enough punchline to save the entire song, I don't even care. He just went back to his song structure and lyrics being finally coherent again. Even when he's saying lines like "you haven't evolved like a crustacean," as corny as it is, you can hear him laughing in the background, so you know even he thinks it's a joke and he's not taking it seriously. In the end, this project was just extremely optimistic. It was Logic saying, I've been through some shit even when I was famous, and I want you guys to know that you will never be alone and there's always going to be people there for you. In one album, he was able to deliver the message he's been trying to get across for these past few years. A to Z is probably my least favorite track here, but even then I love the menacing looped piano. Even Perfect I find myself enjoying because it's a nice breather in between the serious tones of the project. I'm thoroughly impressed that Logic was able to finish his career on such a high note. You can 100% hear the passion that went into making this album, and if this is his last one, more power to him. Now on to the next, number 4. An indie rock record in which the quality just completely threw me off and actually is what got me back into the swing of reviewing albums again. As soon as this album starts, I was completely mesmerized with the production and vocals of the lead singer Samia, which also is the name of the band from my understanding, so it's a little confusing. She's able to build the bridge between her and the listener by spinning ballads of her adolescence. And I really liked how each of these songs had a bit of a psychedelic edge to them. No one track felt straightforward and very obvious with the direction it was headed. The songwriting as well was extremely detailed, and when she was talking about a lot of relatable topics, it made you feel it and put yourself in her shoes. For instance, the track Big Wheel, while also having an extremely catchy chorus. I got bad news close, but I didn't fight. It's all about the difficulties of expressing your grievances about a friend to that friend because you care so much about them. Or Limbo Bitch when she's putting on this tough girl facade because she feels like this person only likes her for that kind of attitude, when in reality that's not truly who she is. You have these extremely relatable lyrics along with Samia, who's guiding you along like a spirit through this majestic journey. It's like this is her version of Dumbledore's memory pool, and she doesn't enjoy telling you these stories, but she feels like she needs to get it off her chest and to let you know that, yeah, I've been through this shit too. Such unfiltered, raw emotion coming through Samia's vocals, you can't help but deny that. I buy everything that she's saying because you can't really make up the emotion that she's delivering. After all this time, the acoustic vocals on Winnebago still give me chills. And I've even learned to appreciate the closing track, Is There Something in the Movies, a lot more since I first listened to the record and reviewed it, having a lot deeper subject matter than I was initially giving it credit for, and it ties up the project pretty nicely. Like I said, I tried this album on a whim and I was thoroughly impressed with what I heard. So much so that I felt inclined to make a review about it the next day, that if I could reach anybody about this album, if I could turn somebody onto this album, at least it's one more person because of how good it is. Obviously not the easiest thing to do since I sit at less than 30 subscribers, but if it turned one person onto the album, it was worth it. If you're big into indie rock, then I say go and listen to this album. It is fantastic and worth your time. Or just willing to expand your palette, I'd still suggest. But now it is time to move on to our top slots, starting with number 3. It had to be somewhere, we all know this. The day that The Weeknd actually releases a bad album is the day that Trump admits he was actually a bad president. Another case where the opener, Alone Again, immediately sucked into the album. No time wasted, straight out the gate, Abel comes in with those heart-wrenching lyrics and dramatic-ass production. This was a highly anticipated release from The Weeknd, as it was delayed for so long and built up with so much anticipation, with Heartless and Blinding Lights being the singles released a couple months prior, both being smash singles, as we've seen mainly with Blinding Lights being an absolute monster on the charts all of 2020. Oh, but let's nominate Justin Bieber's Yummy though for a Grammy. But despite hearing these two singles, I couldn't put a tab on what this album was going to sound like. They seemed to be going stylistically in two different directions, so it left me curious, what was the album After Hours going to entail? And like I said, from the opening track Alone Again, I was instantly hooked on this album. Yes, you can expect your elements of R&B, you can expect your elements of hip-hop, pop as well, ever since the New Age Weekend, since Beauty Behind the Madness. But here it seems like he's going for that 80s aesthetic a lot more throughout the project. For a different gender perspective, we've seen Dua Lipa do this pretty well throughout 2020 as well. And truthfully, I don't know how this guy does it. I don't know how he tears himself down for every single project, puts all this blame and heartbreak on himself, only to do it again for the next project. It's not just him saying, I'm bad at love, I'm not good at love, you shouldn't love me. The Weeknd knows how to take those themes but present them as if they're his own scars, his own personal wounds. He makes it thematic, so there are some redemption arcs. He's trying to make himself or convince himself that he's a better person than he actually is, but there are some moments when he can't help but loathe in it. I love how you can go from a track like Blinding Lights, in which he's drunk and he's driving and he's being blinded by the streetlights, but he can't help the urge to see this person because he wants to so desperately. It's optimistic in a way. But then you can go to the actual track After Hours, in which it sounds like Blinding Lights was only a fantasy because he knows in his heart this relationship, it ain't working out anymore. There are two different moods but follow this thematic narrative throughout the album. On the first few listens, it's easy to get swept away in the sound of the album because it sounds fantastic. However, there is this also depressing, heart-wrenching narrative that's buried within the music. Just an album I found myself returning to time and time again. If I was out at night for some reason, if I had to take a late night drive, this was the album I always put on. The Weeknd proves he is getting better with time. He is only improving his songwriting and his song structure, and I cannot wait to see what the future holds for The Weeknd. Now let's go ahead and move on to our last couple of slots, starting with number 2. I liked this album when it was released, and it only got better from there. This album is pretty lengthy, but after every listen I felt inclined to come back to it. David Diggs' speedy flow and specific imagery allows you to go back to the album multiple times and pick up on new things you didn't quite catch the previous time. And my god, if these guys aren't revitalizing the subgenre of rap horrorcore with such a passion. Hudson and Snipes produced the soundscape for this album so well that it genuinely terrifies me listening to some of these songs. I love when an album can give you the same effect, if not a better effect, than a movie. The production and Diggs' storytelling puts you right in the position of the main character like you're watching it on the big screen right in front of you. When I listen to this album, I think, wow, they didn't let any detail go unnoted. There is so much attention and care put into this album that it puts you into these positions so well. I love the track 96, Nev Campbell, for its flip on the idea of a final girl, how it's a cliche in horror movies and horror books, how there has to be one final girl remaining who has to struggle and make you feel bad for her. But then you have these fantastic features from Cam and China in which they flip that whole narrative on its head, talking about how they didn't just make it out of this scenario, but they kicked ass in the process. I love the track She Bad, how it flips the idea of a bad girl and makes it actually, in this context, about a freaky female ghost that lives in the forest that a bunch of teenagers stumble across, and it doesn't end well. Diggs is able to shift the perspective of somebody that's paranoid checking the locks 24/7 to somebody that is from the cannibal's perspective looking for actual meat to feast on within 2 tracks. And that's what adds to the allure of the album. It's not that these songs necessarily connect, it's that it plays out like you're flipping through a book full of different horror stories, or like you're watching the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie, but all the stories are actually frightening. The project never strays away from trying new and experimental ideas, and every time it does so, it plays out to their advantage. With the talent that everybody in this group possesses, it's easy for them to make a very mainstream or average rap record, just one that flexes their abilities without getting too attention to detailed. I mean, just looking at Daveed Diggs, the dude can spit crazily. The rhyme schemes, the flow, the imagery, it's all potent as hell. I mean, I've heard this guy rap about getting paper like cheddar cheese and still make it sound fire. But on this record, there's always gonna be some kind of smaller soundbite that Hudson and Snipes are going to include to enhance the feeling. And whatever energy the track requires, you know that Diggs is gonna be there to match it. It's all really impressive, and even more so when you're done shaking off the horror this album presents. You don't even have to listen to this album in October to get the full effect. You could listen in like June and still be scared to walk home alone. I just have so much adoration for the level these guys are currently performing on. I knew they were something special after their self-titled album and after Splendor and Misery being such thought out and well-produced albums, but with There Existed an Addiction to Blood and with Visions of Bodies Being Burned, I think they have fully evolved into their own being. One that knows how to generate true horror without being too muddied and complex, like on Splendor and Misery, as much as I did like that album. It's simply, we can make good horrorcore, and that's exactly what we're gonna do. Clipping continues to push the envelope. I am so glad they released this project in tandem with the one they released last year, and if the next one can be just as grand and chilling as this opus here, then I'm more than looking forward to it. But ladies and gentlemen, I think it is about that time that I reveal my #1 album of 2020. What album could it be that trumps the rest of these great releases, that proved to be an album that was more essential than any of these, an album that was needed in the year of 2020? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think you know the answer to that. This right here is simply incredible. How is this the 4th album in their saga, and yet it sounds like one of the best ones they've ever made? Oh, I know why. It's because they know how to not sound jaded and keep up with the times. LP said it best. 2 people that have been rapping since the 90s should not be on the cutting edge of newer age hip-hop right now. But yet, him and Killer Mike managed to do that with flying colors. It sounds like they just started rapping last year and have something to prove. And in a way, they kinda do. Not so much from a skill set standpoint. I mean, we've seen that exemplified with the first 2 RTJ projects, but with so much racial inequality and social injustice that is happening in our current age in America, they take on the task of being the people that are representative of the underdogs, the people that are going to inspire and lead the revolt against the higher powers. It would have been, just like Clipping, extremely easy to come in, rap their ass off, and leave, prove they have good skill, and then that's it. But yet they contextualize the album around the idea that LP is now Yankee and Killer Mike is now the Brave based off the baseball teams from their respective cities, and that every other RTJ project has only been an episode, and now they're on episode 4 where they built up their repertoire and are ready to take on the world. After transitioning from harder bangers into more socially conscious songs in the latter half of RTJ 3, they are now looked at as threats to society, awakening the public and letting them know of the corrupt nature that is happening around them on a larger scale. And because the larger scale, aka probably the government, doesn't want the public knowing about these things, they're after RTJ trying to stop them or censor them. But under this pressure, do they remain quiet? Hell no, they're more in your face than ever. These rebellious tones are either put extremely blunt like on Walking in the Snow or Just, or on Out of Sight and Ooh La La, where essentially they're just like, the law, we're doing whatever the hell we want to do. And oh my god, LP, I don't know how this dude manages to be so forward thinking and progressive with his hip hop production. I'm telling you, I listen to any RTJ project, let's just focus on this one here, I have heard nothing like this, and I mean that. From the minute this album opens, you already feel like you're in the backseat of the car while they're driving it and shooting guns out the window running from the law. A chase they just barely escape so they can tell the stories they want to tell on this album. The flows LP and Killer Mike present on this album are just dizzying, head spinning. I have never heard these flows in my life. It is impeccable. They know when to not get too crazy with it though, like on Killer Mike's verse on Walking in the Snow, he knows how to make it just blunt and impactful and just smack you over the head like, dude, wake the up to what's happening in society. And it's so compact that by the end of it, even though this is the 4th album they released as a duo, you're left wanting more. Everybody was saying the same thing when this album was announced. It was, how can RTJ manage to top everything they've done up until this point in their career? But they managed to do that by pulling out all the stops to be poignant with their subject matter and cover topics that really matter. And what's so crazy about this is a lot of these songs were recorded before what happened over the summer with a lot of Black lives being unjustifiably taken. They were gonna put this out before shit even hit the fan in 2020 with racial inequality. And that's what actually made them release the album earlier than it was supposed to be. Which all comes down to, history is going to repeat itself if you don't do something about it. Which is why I don't just love this project because of a technical skill and production on it, it's because it has a message, it's because it inspires people to do better. If there's something you're feeling suppressed by or is upsetting you, stand up for yourself, stand up for your rights. And for all those reasons, I have to crown RTJ4 as my album of the year in 2020. Despite being veterans of the rap game, these guys are somehow able to run it as well. An album experience by them is truly their own experience that can be mimicked by no other artist. So thank you RTJ, rather LP and Killer Mike, for coming through with such beautiful content here. It was my album of the year. I listened to it so many times last year, it's ridiculous. And again, just thank you. Whew, alrighty, that is going to do it for my top 12 best albums of 2020. Man, these lists always wear me out. Thank you for making it all the way until the end of this video. If you made it all the way to the end, you know I truly appreciate that. I try to be as objective as possible when I'm making these lists, but at the end of the day, it comes down to my own personal opinion and how much I enjoy these albums like I showed in the beginning of this video. So I would love to hear your guys' favorite albums. Do you think I should have ranked these albums differently? Do you think I was missing an album, should have left one out? Let me know in the comments section, or you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, links in the description, and we can talk about it there. If you want to leave a like or subscribe, I would appreciate that as well. I have one more list coming before I close out my year-end lists, and I'll see you in the next one.
The conditions that we rap about that resonate with people around pain and suffering and social disorder and how dystopian the state is becoming is always